The sterilized daughter was sent away as a cruel joke, but the lonely colonel changed her destiny in a way no one could have ever imagined. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone is cast aside as worthless, only to find a love that transforms everything? In the dusty heart of the American frontier, when honor meant more than gold and dreams were buried beneath layers of red dirt, a young woman named Miriam was humiliated by her own family and sent to the ranch of a solitary man. Not out of kindness, but so everyone could laugh at her expense. But what nobody knew, was that this forced encounter would become a story of profound pain, unexpected courage, and a romance so powerful it would defy destiny itself. And pay close attention, because at the end, something so surprising happens, something so far beyond what anyone imagined, that you'll be shocked when you discover what truly happened to Miriam and Colonel Jonas. Something that changed their lives forever, and that almost no one in the village believed when they saw it with their own eyes. Hold your heart tight, because this is a story from another time, of simple people, of cruel secrets, but also of hope, resilience, and a love that was born precisely from pain. Now tell me, from which city are you watching this deeply moving story? Chapter 1, The Burden. Willowbrook was a small village lost in the scorching plains of 19th-century America, where windows rattled with the dry wind and red dust invaded even the strongest adobe homes. People lived in suspicion, watching one another, as if any secret could be traded for a glass of fresh water. In those days, bad reputation spread faster than the rooster's crow at dawn. And nobody knew this better than Miriam Hartwell, a young woman of 19 years. Miriam was slender, with a pale face, hands cracked from labor, and a serene gaze that concealed tremendous pain. Ever since the village healer, following orders she didn't understand, had spread the word that she could never bear children, the girl's life had transformed into a sequence of silent humiliations. One morning, as she left to buy flour, she heard whispers. "That's her, the girl who's good for nothing," murmured a woman at the general store entrance. "A burden on her family, that type of girl has no future," added another. Miriam pressed her basket against her body and continued forward, as she always did, trying to swallow the words that wounded her more than the midday sun. When she returned home, her father, Thomas Hartwell, waited for her with a closed expression. He wasn't violent, but he was hard, dry, like the cracked ground of the village, and he no longer saw any use in having Miriam living under his roof. "Pack your things," he ordered without preamble. Miriam stopped, not understanding. "Where am I going, father?" "To Colonel Jonas Whitmore's ranch. The man needs help and has agreed to receive you. It'll be good for both of us." His voice didn't hide the impatience, nor the malicious intention that would later spread throughout the village. Many believed that sending Miriam to the young colonel's ranch was a kind of joke, a cruel mockery, as if she were being discarded like worthless goods. Miriam tried to argue. "But father, you didn't even ask if I wanted to go. I don't know this man. You don't need to know him. He's hardworking and you have no choice. People here have already talked too much about you." Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no one to defend her. Her mother had died years before, and her siblings had gone their separate ways, with little connection to the girl. Hours later, Miriam climbed into Thomas's wagon, carrying only 2 changes of clothes and an old rosary that had belonged to her mother. The sound of the wheels cutting through the dirt road seemed to accompany her tight heart. Along the way, she tried to ask something. "Father, do you really think this is right?" He answered without looking at her. "What's right is taking weight off my shoulders. At the ranch, maybe you'll be good for something." That pierced her soul like a splinter. And it was in this painful silence, broken only by the distant call of a hawk, that Miriam realized she was being sent away not out of concern, but so they could rid themselves of her as if she were a problem without solution. When she finally spotted Colonel Jonas Whitmore's ranch, a vast place surrounded by well-maintained fences and a simple wooden manor house, Miriam felt her heart race. There was dust in the air, the smell of leather and fresh coffee coming from the veranda. And there, standing beside the corral, was Jonas. A man of firm posture, tall, broad-shouldered, with a serious gaze. Thomas pulled the wagon up to him and said with disdain, "Here's the girl, weak for some things, but maybe she'll help with the work." Jonas frowned, clearly bothered by the way the man spoke of his own daughter. Miriam descended slowly, clutching the rosary in her hand. Jonas approached and spoke in a respectful tone. "Welcome, miss. Here, no one will disrespect you." Miriam lowered her eyes, surprised by the unexpected gentleness. Thomas, however, made sure to add, "Don't expect much from her. This girl is Barren. The whole village already knows." Jonas cast a hard look at him. "And why should that matter to me?" he responded curtly. Miriam felt her face burn. Shame fell over her like a bucket of cold water. Jonas then turned to her, his voice low and firm. "Here, you don't need to explain anything. We'll take it slow. You'll settle in." And in that moment, before the dust that began to rise with the wind, Miriam noticed something strange. Jonas was the first man in a long time who didn't look at her with contempt. It was the first sign, even if she didn't understand it yet, that her destiny was about to change profoundly. The weight of those words, the weight of that moment, the weight of finally being seen as something other than a burden, settled over Miriam like a warm blanket on a cold night. She didn't know it then, but standing there in the dust of that ranch entrance, her entire life was beginning to turn in a direction she never could have imagined. A direction that would lead her through valleys of pain, mountains of truth, and eventually, to a love that would rewrite everything she thought she knew about herself. Chapter 2, The Solitary Colonel. Colonel Jonas Whitmore lived in a solitude that wasn't merely physical, but also deeply emotional. The ranch he had inherited from his parents was vast, full of life, but inside him, everything seemed far too silent. Since his mother's early death, and years later his father's passing, Jonas had learned to live without depending on anyone. He cared for every corner of the land with devotion, as if the property were the only link that still connected him to the world. The village people said he was cold, difficult to deal with, but the truth was that Jonas simply no longer knew how to get close to anyone. Pain had made him reserved, and hard work was his way of forgetting the emptiness. When Thomas left Miriam there, Jonas perceived two different weights. The weight of humiliation she carried, and the weight of responsibility now resting in his hands. As soon as the wagon moved away and the sound of wheels disappeared down the dirt road, Jonas turned to the girl. "Don't mind his ways," he said, crossing his arms. "Sometimes people who feel little, talk too much." Miriam raised her eyes for the first time since arriving. "I'm sorry for any inconvenience, sir. I can work hard. I just need a corner to help out." Jonas shook his head slowly. "Here, no one is forced to do anything by shouting. You'll learn things in your own time. Let's start slowly." He led her through the house. He showed her the simple room, with a wooden bed, clean sheets, and a window overlooking the pasture. It was more dignified than anything she'd had in recent years. Miriam touched the doorframe, moved. "I don't deserve all this." Jonas frowned, not understanding. "And who told you that?" She hesitated before answering. "Many people, for a very long time." He didn't insist, but he registered the pain in her voice. It was the kind of pain he recognized all too well. A silent wound that you can't see, but hurts every single day. In the following days, the coexistence between the two began to take shape. Miriam helped in the kitchen, cleaning the house, and when necessary, carried water to the workers. She observed Jonas from afar, noticing the strength with which he handled the plow, the care he took with the animals, his calm and honest posture. Jonas, on the other hand, noticed something that no one in the village seemed to see. The serene determination of this girl, the polite way she spoke, the delicate manner in which she treated even the chickens in the yard. One afternoon, while she hung clothes on the line, he approached. "Miriam, you're doing well. You don't need to push yourself so hard to prove anything." She smiled slightly, timidly. I just want to be useful. Jonas tilted his head. You're already useful. I just want you to be at peace. Miriam lowered her eyes. It's been a long time since I heard someone say that to me. There was a silence between them that wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if something was being built there, brick by brick, word by word. However, there was a detail Jonas hadn't yet revealed to her. He already knew all the rumors, and had already decided that regardless of what people said, this girl would have respect under his roof. Some workers even commented, "Boss, this girl won't give you an heir." People talk about it. Jonas responded dryly, I didn't buy people. I took in someone. And that's already more than many do around here. The men fell silent. At night, after dinner, Miriam always washed the dishes slowly, as if it helped organize her thoughts. Jonas, sitting in the rocking chair on the veranda, watched the star-filled sky, trying to understand why this girl's presence seemed to illuminate the house in a way that hadn't happened in years. One night, rain began to fall. It was rare to rain at that time of year. Miriam ran to close the windows, laughing softly when the wind almost tore off her scarf. Jonas appeared at the door and commented, "First heavy rain since the drought began, came the day you arrived." Miriam looked at him, surprised. "Do you think that means something?" Jonas breathed deeply, not taking his eyes off her. "I think sometimes life sends signals, and we just need the courage to see them." It was the first time Miriam felt her heart beat faster since stepping foot on that ranch. And it was also the first moment Jonas realized how much she was already affecting his feelings, even though neither of them would admit it yet. The coexistence between them wasn't simple, but it was sincere. And it was precisely this sincerity that was beginning to unite two destinies marked by pain. A union that would still face much suffering, but which also held a twist capable of changing everything. The days passed with a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Miriam would wake before dawn, prepare coffee with hands that no longer trembled, and watch as Jonas headed out to the fields with that steady stride of a man who knew exactly what needed to be done. She learned the patterns of the ranch. Which chickens laid eggs where, which corner of the barn caught the afternoon light, which spot by the well offered the coolest water. Small details, but they were hers to know now. She wasn't just passing through anymore. She was beginning, slowly, carefully, to belong. Jonas noticed these changes too. The way she no longer flinched when he entered a room. The way her voice grew steadier when she spoke. The way she sometimes hummed quietly while working, a sound so soft he had to stop what he was doing just to make sure he wasn't imagining it. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and deep purple, Jonas found her sitting on the porch steps, looking out at the endless horizon. He sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly, not turning to look at him. "It is," Jonas agreed. "I've seen this sunset 1,000 times, but lately it looks different somehow." "Different how?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Less lonely, I suppose." Miriam turned to him then, her eyes searching his face in the fading light. "I feel the same way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with things unsaid, with feelings not yet ready to be named. But they were there, growing, like seeds in dark soil, waiting for the right moment to break through into the light. And in that moment, sitting side by side as the day surrendered to night, both Miriam and Jonas understood something profound. They were no longer strangers. They were no longer simply landlord and worker. They were becoming something else entirely. Something neither of them had names for yet. Something that would soon change everything. Chapter 3, The First Rain. The rain that fell that night was uncommon. In the plains, when the sky decided to open up, it seemed like the entire world changed its mood along with it. The tiles of Jonas's ranch vibrated with the impact of the thick drops, and the smell of wet earth invaded every corner of the house. For Miriam, It was as if God had washed away, at least for an instant, the hard memories she carried. Jonas watched from the veranda as she ran to collect the clothes from the line, laughing softly as she stumbled on the hem of her own skirt. It was a timid laugh, almost forgotten, as if Miriam were relearning to feel something that wasn't fear or shame. When she entered the veranda with her dress soaked and a strand of hair stuck to her forehead, Jonas said with a discreet smile, "If you stay in the rain like that too long, you'll end up catching cold." Miriam lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir. I just didn't want the clothes to get wet." "You don't need to apologize for the rain, Miriam. It comes when it wants." She smiled slightly. And Jonas noticed something that touched him deeply. That simple smile was perhaps the most sincere he had seen in years. Later, while the rain continued strong, Miriam busied herself preparing hot coffee. Miriam turned, holding 2 mugs. "Of course. Why did your father speak to you that way? As if you were worthless." She hesitated. It was difficult to open such painful wounds. "Because I didn't give him what he expected from a daughter. He always said that a woman who can't bear children isn't good for much." Jonas rested his hands on the table, pondering. "And do you believe that?" She answered without looking at him. "Sometimes, when you hear the same thing your whole life, you start to believe it." Jonas then stood up slowly, approached, and spoke firmly. "Well, here you won't be measured by any gossip, nor by people who don't know how to see beyond their own ignorance." His voice was so genuine that Miriam felt her chest tremble. For the first time, someone was speaking to her without pity, only with respect. But the rain that night brought more than a feeling of renewal. It also brought comments in the village. The next day, some residents were saying, "It rained the day the sterile girl arrived, strange thing." Others commented, "Could it be a sign, or is Jonas getting soft?" These conversations reached the ears of the ranch workers, and soon reached Jonas. While shucking corn in the corral, a foreman approached. "Boss, people are saying this girl brings either luck or misfortune. Do you believe in such things?" Jonas looked up, irritated. "The only thing I believe is that she has suffered more than anyone deserves. And here, no one will treat her with disrespect." The foreman swallowed hard and stepped back. At the end of the afternoon, the sky remained cloudy. After helping collect water from the cistern, Miriam walked to the fence overlooking the infinite gray of the plains. Jonas approached, holding a poncho for her. "Take this, Miriam, it's going to get cold." "Thank you," she said, adjusting the fabric over her shoulders. "This rain seems to have changed the air." "Rain always changes the air," said Jonas. "But sometimes it changes lives too." She looked at him, confused. "You say that, why?" Jonas breathed deeply before responding. "Because since you arrived, the ranch has stopped feeling so empty." Miriam felt her face flush, and looked away to the wet ground. "I'm glad if I'm truly helping." Jonas smiled. "You're helping much more than you think." The cold wind hit them both, and for an instant, they stood side by side in silence. It was a loaded silence, not of distance, but of something that didn't yet have a name. The first rain was just the beginning. Between the sound of drops that insisted on falling, and the timid brightness in Miriam's eyes, a discreet connection began to be born. Deep and inevitable. A connection that sooner or later would be tested by pain, and that would completely change the destiny of them both. The rain continued through the night, steady and persistent. Miriam lay in her bed, listening to the rhythm of drops on the roof, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid of what tomorrow might bring. In his own room, Jonas sat by the window, watching the rain wash across the land, and wondered how it was possible that one person could make such a difference in such a short time. He thought about her laugh earlier, the way she'd run through the rain without caring about getting wet, the simple joy on her face. It reminded him of what life used to feel like, before loss and loneliness had hardened him. before he'd forgotten that there were still good things worth holding on to. The rain fell harder, and somewhere between the thunder and the darkness, both Miriam and Jonas were thinking about each other, though neither would have admitted it if asked. The storm outside was nothing compared to the quiet storm beginning to build inside their hearts. A storm that would eventually break, bringing with it both destruction and renewal, pain and healing, endings and new beginnings. But that night, they simply listened to the rain, and allowed themselves to hope, just a little, that maybe, just maybe, something beautiful was beginning to grow between them. Chapter 4, The Silent Agreement. In the days following that first rain, the coexistence between Jonas and Miriam began to transform into something neither of them expected. It wasn't romance yet, it wasn't declared friendship, it was simply a silent complicity, built with simple gestures, short words, and a profound understanding that happened without effort. Jonas was a man of few words, but firm actions. And Miriam, who had always lived walking on fragile ground, found it strange the security he transmitted. On the ranch, there were no accusatory looks, no laughter behind backs, there was space, there was time, there was calm. One morning, Jonas found her sweeping the veranda, concentrated, not noticing the fine dust that returned with the wind. "Miriam," he called, leaning against the doorframe. "You don't need to wake before the sun just to work. I don't want you pushing yourself beyond what's necessary." She stopped, holding the broom tightly. "I'm used to it. At home, I never had much time to rest." "Well, here you will," he responded firmly. "I didn't bring you here to be a slave, or a worker from sunup to sundown." Miriam breathed deeply, touched by his words. "Then, what do you expect from me, Jonas?" He hesitated for an instant, then walked slowly toward her. "I expect mutual respect between us, and peace within this house. The rest, we'll build with time." It was the beginning of an agreement, unspoken, but deeply felt between them. This silent understanding became even clearer when, on a hot afternoon, Miriam accidentally knocked over a basin full of water in the hallway. Nervous, she ran to get a cloth, already expecting to hear a scolding or an unpleasant comment. Jonas appeared, saw the wet floor and her desperation. "Miriam, calm down, it's nothing serious." She tried to explain. I didn't want to cause trouble. Whenever I dropped something at home, my father." Jonas interrupted her, his voice gentle. "I'm not your father." The phrase fell between them like a revelation. Miriam swallowed hard, feeling a knot in her throat. "I know, but it's hard to forget certain things." Jonas bent down and began cleaning the floor himself, without looking at her. "Then let's forget together. Here, no one will raise their voice at you." Miriam knelt beside him, and for a few seconds they stayed there, close, sharing not just the task, but an intimate moment of humanity. There was no mocking laughter, no marking of failures, there were only two people trying to deal with their own pains. That afternoon, as night descended and the sky gained a copper color, Jonas served a simple dinner. Rice, salt-cured beef, and thick beans. They sat at the table, and for the first time Miriam ate without hurry. "Did you like the food?" he asked. "Very much. I don't remember the last time I ate this peacefully." Jonas drank a sip of water and watched her carefully. "I didn't know that was also something you needed." Miriam smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Simple things have always been the hardest for me." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence that said more than any sentence could say in that moment. Jonas understood that this girl carried deep wounds, wounds that time alone wouldn't heal. But he also realized that he wanted to be part of that healing, even if he didn't know how. On the veranda, before they went to sleep, Miriam finally took courage. "Jonas, why have you treated me well since the first day, even knowing what people say about me?" He rested his hands on the railing, looking at the dark pasture. "Because I know what it's like to be judged for things nobody understands. I've also carried a reputation I didn't deserve. And nobody deserves to be treated the way you were. I'm grateful, Miriam murmured, moved. I thought I'd never have a safe place again. Jonas turned to her, serious. While you're here, Miriam, you do. Those words marked the official beginning of the silent agreement between them. Jonas offered protection, respect, and dignity. Miriam offered dedication, kindness, and a heart that, even wounded, was still capable of feeling. They didn't know it, but this pact would be the foundation that would sustain everything that was to come. The pains, the conflicts, and the love that would be born in the most unexpected way. The weeks passed and that unspoken agreement grew stronger with each passing day. Jonas began to trust Miriam with more responsibilities around the ranch. Not because he needed the help, though he did, but because he wanted her to feel like she truly belonged there. That this wasn't just temporary shelter, but a real home. Miriam, for her part, began to take pride in the work she did. The garden she tended began to flourish. The bread she baked became something the workers looked forward to. The small touches she added to the house, a curtain here, a cleaned window there, made the whole place feel more alive. More cared for. More like a home than it had been in years. One evening, as they worked together to repair a section of fence, Miriam paused and looked at Jonas. "Can I ask you something?" "Always," he replied, not looking up from the post he was securing. "Why did you agree to take me in?" "My father must have offered you something, but you could have refused." Jonas stopped working then, and turned to face her fully. "Your father offered nothing I needed or wanted. I agreed because..." He paused, searching for the right words. "Because when I looked at you that day, I saw someone who needed a chance. And I remembered what it felt like, to need that chance myself." "What do you mean?" "After my parents died, I was lost for a long time. This ranch, it saved me. Gave me purpose. And I thought, maybe I could offer that same thing to someone else." Miriam felt tears prick her eyes. "You've given me more than purpose, Jonas. You've given me back my dignity." He reached out, hesitated, then gently squeezed her shoulder. "You always had dignity, Miriam. Some people just couldn't see it." They returned to work in companionable silence. But something had shifted again between them. Another brick had been laid in the foundation they were building together. Neither of them could see the full structure yet. But with each passing day, each shared meal, each quiet conversation under the stars, it was growing. Rising up around them. Solid and sure and true. And though storms still waited on the horizon, though pain and revelation were yet to come, in that moment they had this. They had each other. They had their silent agreement. They had hope. And sometimes, that's all you need to begin building something that will last. Chapter 5, The Weight of Reputation. As the weeks turned into months, Miriam began to adapt to the new routine on the ranch. She woke early, helped with tidying the house, took care of small tasks, and gradually began to accompany Jonas in some of the lighter field activities. He explained every detail with patience, something she had never received before. But despite the improvement in her daily life, the unjust reputation that had followed her from the village continued to weigh on her heart. It was like a shadow that insisted on following her, even in the land where she was trying to start over. On a hot morning, while separating beans in the yard, Miriam heard laughter coming from the gate. Two men from the village had come to deliver supplies to Jonas, and upon seeing the girl, they commented without bothering to be discreet. "Look there, the girl they say will never bear a child. Yeah, that's probably why the boss lives so quietly. With her, he'll never make an heir." The words reached Miriam like stones. She lowered her head and continued her work, feeling her throat burn. Jonas, who was in the corral, heard everything. He came out with heavy steps and faced the two men. "If you've come to bring supplies, bring them. If you've come to bring poison in your mouths, you can return to the village right now. The men looked at each other, disconcerted. Easy, Jonas. We were just joking around here. Nobody jokes about the dignity of someone who lives with me. Don't repeat that. The men left without insisting, and Miriam, even relieved, felt her heart tight. Jonas approached slowly and said, "Miriam, you don't need to believe what they say." She breathed deeply, trying to contain her tears. "But everyone believes it, Jonas. I've been hearing this for years. Each time, it feels like I lose a piece of myself." Jonas sat beside her in the yard, under the strong sun. "I know what it's like to carry a reputation you didn't choose. I spent a good part of my life being called rough, cold, a man without a heart. And you know why? Because I didn't know how to show what I felt. But that wasn't true. It was just what people invented." Miriam observed him more carefully than ever. "So you understand?" "I understand. And that's why, while you're here, you won't be judged by any lies." She tried to smile, but the pain was greater than she'd like to admit. "Jonas. I'm afraid I'll never be free of this, of never being seen as a woman of worth." Jonas tilted his head, looking directly into her eyes. "Miriam, your worth has nothing to do with what they say. It has to do with who you are. And I see a lot of good in you." These words affected the girl in a way she wasn't prepared to feel. Her chest warmed, as if someone had opened a door she believed was locked forever. In the following days, Jonas began to include her more in some external activities. He wanted her to feel like part of the ranch's routine, not just a temporary guest. They went together to check the windmill, feed the pigs, arrange the harnesses. And in each small task, a simple conversation was born, sometimes shy, but always sincere. One afternoon, as they walked to the orchard to collect ripe fruit, Miriam commented, "You know, I always thought I'd never have a place where I could breathe peacefully." Jonas responded without looking away from the path. "And have you found that place?" She hesitated before saying, "I think so." Jonas smiled discreetly, but didn't respond. His silence said more than any phrase could. It was the silence of someone who felt something, but still didn't dare to name it. When they returned home, the sky began to change color. The wind brought dust, and the golden light of sunset entered through the window, illuminating Miriam in an almost poetic way. Jonas watched her for a few moments, noticing how much she had changed since she arrived, and how much he himself was changing without realizing it. But despite the gentleness of those days, there was a painful truth that still needed to be faced. You couldn't just flee the village to escape the wounds of the past. They were there, alive, and one day they would demand their price. This truth approached slowly, like the shadow of a heavy cloud, announcing a storm. And when it arrived, it would test everything that Miriam and Jonas were building. The days grew longer and warmer as summer settled over the plains. The work on the ranch intensified, and Miriam found herself taking on more and more responsibility. She discovered she had a natural way with the animals. The horses that were skittish with others would calm under her touch. The milk cows produced more when she was the one who handled them. Even the ranch dog, an old hound named Copper who barely acknowledged anyone, began following her around like a devoted shadow. Jonas noticed all of this. How could he not? She was becoming indispensable, not just to the running of the ranch, but to his daily existence. He began to find excuses to work near wherever she was. If she was in the garden, suddenly he needed to repair that nearby fence. If she was in the kitchen, he discovered some urgent task that required him to pass through multiple times. He told himself it was coincidence. But deep down, he knew better. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day's work, Miriam turned to him with a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Jonas, do you ever wonder about the future? About what comes next?" He considered her words carefully. "I used to plan everything, map out each season, each year. But life has a way of making fools of our plans. So now, I just try to be ready for whatever comes. That sounds lonely, she said softly. It was, he admitted. Past tense. Their eyes met in a fading light. Neither of them looked away. Things are different now, Jonas continued. The future doesn't seem quite so fixed anymore. There are possibilities I didn't see before. What kind of possibilities? He wanted to tell her. Wanted to say that every possibility he imagined now included her. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply said, good ones. Hopeful ones. It wasn't everything he felt. But it was a start. And Miriam, with her newly awakened intuition about such things, understood more than he actually said. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and for just a moment, the weight of her past seemed to lift entirely. In that moment, sitting beside Jonas in the golden hour of evening, Miriam allowed herself to imagine a future. A future where she wasn't defined by what she supposedly couldn't do. A future where she could simply be. And maybe, just maybe, she could be happy. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Because if she let herself hope, and it was taken away, she didn't know if she'd survive the loss. But as she glanced at Jonas's profile, strong and steady beside her, she decided that some risks were worth taking. Some hopes were worth holding on to. Even if they scared you half to death. Chapter 6, The Harvest Festival. Time passed, and with much effort, Jonas's ranch began to show signs of improvement. The pasture recovered somewhat after the rains. The orchard responded well to the care, and even the chickens seemed fatter. It was harvest season. And in the region of Willowbrook, this meant one thing. The traditional harvest festival, which gathered villagers and neighboring ranchers in a night of music, food, and displays of pride. For Miriam, festivals had always meant two things. Being looked at from head to toe, and being talked about in whispers. She feared any place full of people. So when she heard the workers talking about the event, her heart tightened. One of the ranch hands commented, laughing, "Boss, this year you should go to the festival. It's been a while since you've shown up. People even find it strange." Jonas wiped his hands on his pants and responded, "Maybe I'll go. The harvest was good, despite the drought. I think it's time to show up." Another, more daring, added, "And will you take the girl?" The silence that followed was almost tangible. Miriam, who was nearby organizing sacks of corn, pretended not to hear, but her face burned. Jonas looked at her, then returned his gaze to the worker. "If she wants to go, yes. There's no reason to hide anyone." That night, while they were putting away the last utensils, Jonas approached Miriam, who was folding cloths in the kitchen. "Miriam." She raised her eyes, attentive. "Yes, Jonas. In 2 days there will be the harvest festival in the village. Every year people gather to give thanks and show off a little too. I'd like you to come with me." She froze for an instant, surprised. "With you, sir?" "Yes, as someone from the household, as my companion." She felt a mix of fear and emotion. "Jonas, people talk a lot about me. You know that. I don't want to embarrass you." He responded firmly. "Those who should be embarrassed are those who talk too much, not you. Think about it calmly, but I'd be happy if you'd accept." She didn't sleep well that night. When she closed her eyes, images of the village appeared, the looks, the whispers. But also the memory of Jonas's voice, secure, choosing to take her by his side. Something inside her said that if she ran away one more time, she'd never be able to free herself from everything she carried. 2 days later, shortly before sunset, she appeared in the parlor already ready. She wore a simple dress, but well cared for, that she herself had adjusted with thread and needle. In her hair, a discreet braid. On her face, no makeup, just the natural delicacy of someone who carried much history in her gaze. Jonas, upon seeing her, took several seconds to say anything. "You look very beautiful." She blushed. "I used what I had. I hope not to be embarrassing." "The ones who will be embarrassed are those who underestimate you," he responded, offering his arm for her to lean on as she descended the stairs. The journey to the village was made by wagon. The dirt road was full of wheel marks, coming and going. Up ahead, you could already hear the distant sound of accordion, laughter, and fireworks bursting. Miriam gripped her hands on her lap as Jonas drove firmly. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "A little," she confessed. "But I'm also curious. It's been a while since I've seen so many people gathered. If at any moment you feel uncomfortable, just tell me. We'll leave right away. I don't owe anyone there anything." When they arrived at the town square, the festival was already in full swing. Colorful banners hanging, wooden tables with delicacies, people dancing to the music. Some women wore wide skirts, men in leather hats, children running between the stalls. As soon as they descended from the wagon, some looks immediately turned toward them. "Look there, it's Colonel Jonas Whitmore, and he brought the girl with him." "Is that her, the sterile one?" "Yeah, she actually looks prettier up close." The whispers ran. Miriam felt everything, even without looking at anyone. Her instinct told her to retreat, but Jonas's firm hand, resting on her back, was a reminder. She wasn't alone. He leaned in and whispered, "Look straight ahead. You don't owe anything to anyone here." They went to the food table. An older lady, an acquaintance of Jonas, greeted them. "Good evening, Jonas. Good to see you here. And this girl, who is she?" Before Miriam could respond, Jonas spoke first. "This is Miriam. She lives and works with me on the ranch. One of the most decent people I know." Miriam was surprised by how he introduced her. Not as someone who was sent there, but as someone of value. Throughout the night, the two walked through the festival. Some looked away, others whispered. A young man, with a malicious smile, commented loud enough for her to hear. "She can come pretty, dressed up, but everyone knows she's no good for making a family." Before Miriam could move away, Jonas turned and faced the young man directly. His voice serious, but controlled. "Do you have a mother?" "I do, of course." "Then imagine someone saying she's worthless in front of everyone. Would that be funny?" The young man lost his composure. "I didn't mean to offend, it was just a comment. Comments also hurt. Be careful what you spread around." The atmosphere around them became heavy for a few seconds, until someone changed the subject. Miriam felt her heart racing, but also a kind of pride she had never felt before. She wasn't being left behind. She was being defended. Later, the music became even more lively. People began pulling partners to dance. A man approached Jonas. "Whitmore, you going to stand there planted? Come to the circle, bring the girl." Jonas looked at Miriam. "Do you want to dance?" She gave a small smile, nervous. "It's been so long. I think I've even forgotten how." "If you've forgotten, we'll learn again together." They went to the middle of the circle, and the accordion began a lively tune. Jonas held her hand carefully, as if it were something extremely precious. Miriam, at first, stepped wrong, stumbled over her own feet, but in a few moments she let herself be carried away. As they spun slowly, under the yellow light of the lanterns and the starry sky, she felt something she hadn't felt in many years. Lightness. It wasn't just dancing. It was being seen differently. Being recognized there, in public, beside a man who wasn't ashamed of her. At one point, Miriam raised her eyes to Jonas. He also looked at her, serious, but with a different brightness. "How long has it been since you danced?" he asked between steps. "Years." I thought I'd never dance again in my life. Well, you danced today. And you danced very well. When the music ended, some even clapped. Not specifically for them, but for all the couples together. Even so, Miriam felt as if that applause was also a little bit hers. She breathed deeply, her chest tight with emotion. The festival seemed perfect. But as always, where there is too much light, there is also shadow. And the shadow of that night came in the form of malicious words said later, when she needed to go to the well to get drinking water. As she filled the cup, two women were talking nearby. Pretty, isn't it? Him dancing with her as if she were his wife. Pretty nothing. He deserves a woman who can give him an heir. That thing is nothing more than ranch decoration. Miriam stood still. The words struck the same old wounds again. She felt the bitter taste of shame rising in her throat. When she returned to near Jonas, already with teary eyes, he noticed immediately. What happened? He asked, serious. It's nothing, just tiredness. He didn't insist there in the middle of everyone, but the joy of the festival for her had been cracked inside. Even so, that night, something important had happened. Miriam, for the first time in a long time, was seen beside someone who claimed her openly. And Jonas, before everyone, showed he wasn't afraid to be associated with her. The harvest festival didn't erase the pains of the past. But it planted a new seed. A seed that later would bear unexpected fruits. In the midst of much pain, much testing, and a love that wasn't born easily, but was born true. The ride home was quieter than the journey there. The wagon creaked along the rutted road, and above them the stars scattered across the black sky like spilled diamonds. Miriam sat close enough to Jonas that their shoulders occasionally touched with the movement of the wagon. Neither of them moved away. I'm sorry, Miriam finally said, breaking the silence. Jonas glanced at her. For what? For ruining the evening. For letting their words affect me. Stop, Jonas interrupted gently. You didn't ruin anything. They did. And their opinions mean nothing to me. But they should, Miriam insisted. You have to live in this community. You have business dealings with these people. My presence, my reputation, it could hurt you. Jonas pulled the wagon to a stop. They were halfway between the village and the ranch, surrounded by darkness and the sound of crickets. He turned to face her fully. Miriam, listen to me carefully. I don't give a damn what those people think about who I choose to have in my life. Not anymore. I spent too many years living for their approval, being what they expected. And you know what it got me? Loneliness. Emptiness. A house that felt like a tomb. His voice was fierce, passionate in a way she'd rarely heard. You didn't ruin anything. You gave me the best evening I've had in years. Dancing with you, introducing you, standing beside you, it made me remember what it feels like to be proud of something. To be proud of someone. Tears spilled down Miriam's cheeks. I don't understand why you care so much. What do you see in me that makes any of this worth it? Jonas reached out and wiped away her tears with his thumb, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. I see courage, he said softly. I see kindness despite cruelty. I see strength that was hammered into you by pain, but didn't break you. I see a woman who makes my house feel like a home. I see. He paused, searching for the right words. I see someone worth fighting for. The space between them seemed to shrink. Miriam could feel the warmth of him, smell the soap he'd used and the faint scent of leather and horses that always clung to his clothes. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain he could hear it. Jonas. She whispered, but didn't know what else to say. He leaned closer, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't want to. When his lips touched hers, it was gentle, questioning, as if asking permission even as it was granted. Miriam's eyes fluttered closed, and she kissed him back, pouring into it all the emotions she couldn't find words for. Gratitude, yes. But also something deeper. Something that felt dangerously like love. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing harder. Jonas rested his forehead against hers. "I shouldn't have done that," he murmured. "I'm sorry." "Don't," Miriam interrupted. "Don't apologize. Not for that." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "I wanted you to." A slow smile spread across Jonas's face, transforming his usually serious features into something boyish and hopeful. Yeah. They sat there for a long moment, just looking at each other, before Jonas finally took up the reins again. But this time, Miriam didn't sit at a proper distance. She sat close, her body pressed against his side. And Jonas, with his free arm, pulled her closer still. Neither of them spoke as they rode the rest of the way home. But the silence wasn't empty or uncomfortable. It was full of promise. Full of possibility. Full of the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. When they finally reached the ranch, Jonas helped her down from the wagon with careful hands. She stood there, looking up at him in the moonlight, and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that felt like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. "Thank you," she said. "For tonight. For everything." Jonas smiled down at her. "Thank you for saying yes. For trusting me enough to go." He wanted to kiss her again. She could see it in his eyes. But instead, he simply squeezed her hand and wished her good night. Some things, he seemed to understand, needed time. Needed to be savored slowly. And as Miriam lay in her bed that night, her fingers touching her lips where his had been, she finally allowed herself to believe something she'd thought impossible. Maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to be happy. Maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to be loved. And maybe, just maybe, her story didn't have to be defined by pain and rejection. Maybe it could be about something else entirely. Maybe it could be about hope. And love. And a future she was only just beginning to imagine. Chapter 7, The Illness. The days following the harvest festival were different. There was more care in the gestures, more delicacy in the looks, but there was also a profound silence between them. Not a cold silence, but a silence of those who carry feelings that are still settling. However, the routine on the ranch gave no respite. It was a time of much work. And Jonas, as always, took on more tasks than he should. He woke before sunrise, went straight to the corral, then to the field, and only returned at night, exhausted. Miriam noticed, but he always said, "It's just tiredness, Miriam. Nothing that a bath and coffee won't solve." But she knew it wasn't just that. One particularly hot morning, Jonas insisted on fixing a distant fence, even knowing the sun was merciless. Miriam tried to convince him to wait until the end of the afternoon. "Jonas, the heat today is very strong. You should leave this for later." He smiled, adjusting his leather hat. "If I leave it for later, I won't do it. And if I don't do it, I won't sleep. So let at least someone go with you." "No need. I'll be back before noon." But he didn't return. The sun was burning high when one of the ranch hands ran to the house, sweaty and desperate. "Miriam." "Jonas." Jonas collapsed out by the fence. She felt her heart drop into her stomach. "What do you mean collapsed?" "He's in bad shape. The heat. I think it got to him hard. He started to stagger and fell. He's very hot, very pale." Miriam didn't wait for anything more. She grabbed a wet cloth, a canteen with fresh water, and ran down the dirt road. Her feet kicked up dust with each step. In the distance, she saw Jonas's body leaning against a tree trunk, breathing with difficulty. When she got close, her heart almost stopped. Jonas. Jonas, listen to me, she said, kneeling beside him. He opened his eyes with effort, his breathing heavy. Miriam, you didn't need to come running. I just felt dizzy. She touched his forehead and felt the absurd heat. Your body is on fire. This isn't just dizziness. Why didn't you listen to me? Jonas tried to smile, but the strength wasn't there. I thought I could handle it. The ranch hand who had accompanied Miriam helped lift Jonas and place him in the wagon. The return to the ranch seemed endless. Continued in part 2, in the next video. See you then. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you enjoyed it.